Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. The Security Executive Council and Topo.ai are proud to present what COVID-19 is teaching us about all-hazard risk assessment. We are offering this SEC Solution Innovation Seminar as part of the Topo.ai educational webcast series. My name is Andrew Saluk, and I'm your host today. This meeting will adhere to the Chatham House rule, and we're using a secure Zoom webinar package that has a unique meeting link requiring individual approval of every attendee. So we've made this a really secure experience. But in the unlikely event of some sort of in-broadcast hack, we'll simply suspend the broadcast and resume it at another time. Here's a quick look at our agenda. After the panel presentations, we'll leave time for a live question and answer session. You are welcome to submit your questions throughout the webcast, and I'll explain how to do that in just a moment. Our main objectives today are to share what we've learned from COVID-19 about all hazards risk, to recommend data you can use to help plan the strategic reopening of different offices, and to share some SEC benchmarking data on risk assessments. Let's cover a few quick housekeeping items. If you get disconnected, please just rejoin using the same link that you used originally. This webcast is being recorded, and we'll send a link to the recording plus the presentation slides within 5 business days. Your microphone is muted, and you can submit any questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will ask a few polling questions throughout the broadcast, but these will be anonymous. And we will not share your identity with the audience or attribute any questions or responses to you as an individual, so please feel free to share. We want to just help provide some benchmarking data for the audience. We have some very experienced panelists today from the Security Executive Council. The SEC is the leading research and advisory firm focused on corporate security. They exclusively use former security executives from leading Fortune 500 companies as their subject matter experts. The SEC team blends their many areas of expertise together to provide collective knowledge that encompasses security risk, mitigation strategies, organizational experience, and the importance of corporate culture. We are fortunate today to have Kathleen Kotlicka, Francis Diodario, and Dean Correa with us, and thanks for joining us. Our other panelist is Phil Harris, co-founder of Topo.ai. Topo.ai provides best-in-class command center software for corporate security and business continuity teams. Our product, Topo One software, delivers real-time situational awareness, critical event management, and automated reporting on a single pane of glass. Topo One software integrates virtually any data set from a wide array of internal systems and third-party providers. Let's jump into our presentation. Up first is Dean Correa to discuss dynamic risk assessments. Dean, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate it, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to spend with us on this webinar. As we know, dynamic risk assessments are critical to evaluating the three types of main risks: man-made, natural, and technological. And what was in the true guns, gates, and guards fashion decades ago, where we used pen and pencil, paper to walk around our sites and check locks and pull on doors, has changed significantly as our businesses have changed and our risks have changed. So here's an example pictorially of any one of the number of risks assessments that you may be conducting depending on your industry, and some guidelines and standards that you may be applying to and having to adhere to with your specific industry that you're managing today as a team. So as you'll see, we've gone from a very traditional walk around the building, pull a few doors, to something much more dynamic, depending on the industry as our risks have evolved. And that's what we're going to be talking about today: how you move and flex, especially in the COVID-19 environment that we're in today, to assure that your people, process, and technology is matching and driving the risks of the business. So I'll now pass it over to Francis, and we'll talk more about this perspective. But before that, we'll take it over to Kathleen, and Kathleen will review some of the recent poll information that we had on this topic.
So Dean, this is Andrew here. Kathleen is having a little bit of audio challenge. She just messaged us. So let's go actually to Francis's section to talk about the perspectives, and then we can get back to Kathleen when she's able to rejoin. Okay. Francis, please take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. So if we talk about perspective, particularly on the global level, one of the things that we want to be able to account for per Dean's slide is the variables, the variety, and the diversity of compliance expectations and other expectations that our brand is prepared. It's really a confidence game. In our 10Ks for publicly traded companies in the United States, we rely on in our annual report, a disclosure to stakeholders that we have considered the risks of their investment, that we are prepared to mitigate those risks, and that barring any uncontrolled circumstances, that we are a good investment. So most often, these types of risks will show up in a wide variety of geopolitical, economic, environmental, societal, technological threats. So what we're looking at here is a global risk report from 2020 from the World Economic Forum. So this sort of data and others is arrayed in those 10K reports. And we can see in this particular circumstance that the risk or the threat of infectious disease is in that targeted area up in the left-hand quadrant. And if we're looking at this, a particular graphic on an impact or an expected probability axes, we might question whether or not the World Economic Forum got this right. But the point is that it's on their risk expectation. And it has been in one form or another for the last 15 years. So as we get to whether or not people accurately expected COVID-19 to manifest itself, or whether or not the predicted consequences were correct, we know that we have to be able to be relevant to our organization and others as we're setting these up. Our preparedness and our duty of care to personnel, to critical assets, to critical processes are all important when we're talking about brand reputation. And at the end of the day, are we defensible? Did we properly acknowledge the data that told us that there was likely to be a pandemic? Were we prepared to the point that we were able to mitigate its impact and cost and injury or damage to the organization? Were we in a position where we were able to place ourselves in a point of recovery? So as business continuity, human resources, other peers in the organization are helping us be prepared, we want to be able to make sure that we are resilient at the end of the day. So data sets are all important from an instructive point of view. Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Francis. And we have Kathleen rejoined us now, so we're going to go back and cover those slides that Kathleen was going to discuss.
Thank you. Sorry, I got dropped off and had to try and get back on. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Francis, and good day to everyone. What we're going to look at today is one of our security barometer polls we send to our practitioner community, and this one looked at the use, their use of risk assessment. Not on this slide, but a majority from this poll, almost 90%, said they do conduct risk assessments. But when we asked them whether their risk mitigation strategies are based on risk assessments, only 36% said they do not, and 5% weren't even sure. And by formal risk assessment, we mean standardized methodologies that are documented and repeatable. So the fact that most said they did risk assessments, but almost 40% said they don't base their mitigation plan on their risk assessments brings up the question, what other reasons are they doing risk assessments? So likely, and things we've seen, is it's incident-based versus risk-based. For example, an executive incident occurs, so they start up an executive protection program. Or the typical senior management threat du jour, or something they see in the paper, and they start up a program. Next slide, please. This was also from that same poll, and we found that only 54% conduct risk assessments on a regular basis. Also an element, we think, of a formal risk assessment process. And we found this a bit concerning. I'm sure you probably do too, because threats and vulnerabilities certainly change over time. A reassessment identifies new risks, allows you to re-examine current risks, and it also involves closing risks that are outdated and no longer threatening to the business. So as practitioners, we want to spend the time and resources on the so-called right risks, meaning the risk areas that are the most critical to mitigate in light of company issues or goals. And I believe now I pass it over to Francis.
Thanks, Kathleen. I think we're going to Dean and Francis now to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 resources that you and your colleagues have put together.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Andrew. Appreciate it. And we'll tag team this, Francis and I. So here is a screenshot of what you'll find if you go to the securityexecutivecouncil.com's main page, and at the very front, you'll see a link that will take you to this COVID-19 resource page. And I would encourage you to check often on this resource page because you'll find that we're putting new materials every week that we're gathering from our community and other practitioners globally to help with their response and recovery phase plans for COVID-19. So on this page, you'll find things such as considerations, what worked, what didn't work during the response phase, along with things to think about during the recovery phase, and questions and discussion points you should be having with your leadership teams in terms of giving your staff, vendors, and guests the confidence to come back to your office to conduct business as the new normal, whenever that may happen. But it's important to have those discussions starting now. And you'll find that we've gathered these resources on this page. They're complimentary for you and your teams to benefit from. Along with the resources, you'll see tracking sites below, and whether it's the Johns Hopkins site or the Topo site, which Phil will be discussing later, there's various tracking sites of information that we trust, that we feel you can trust, to deliver credible information to you and your teams as you're managing day to day and week to week with this situation. And I'll pass it over to Francis for other commentary.
Thanks, Dean. Good points all. To Kathleen's point on reassessment and what the data shows us, this page gives us an opportunity to bring in some of our next generation talent as well. So as you're getting ready to reassess the lessons of COVID-19, it's probably important to do an after action or a post-mortem at both the enterprise and the business unit level. So the questions are, how well did we do? What did we miss? What might we do better next time around? Because as we saw with the World Economic Forum data, the other things are going to keep being thrown at us. We're still going to have natural disasters. We're still going to have breakouts of war, revolution, civil disturbances. We're still going to have other environmental issues, including climate change, water crises, and food. So how can we take the data? How can we really truly measure our vulnerability? And how can we give management the confidence that we're staying ahead of the game as we're collecting all of this risk intelligence in our global security operations centers and our global risk operations centers, and really makes sense and put all of that into perspective. Andrew?
Thanks, Francis. Thank you, sir. And so now we're going to move into our first audience polling question. I'll go ahead and launch it now. Just please take part in this poll. And just a reminder that we're not going to share your individual responses or your identity with the audience. And so the question is, which of the following are challenges you have experienced with assessing and or mitigating COVID-19 risk? Please select all that apply. You'll see 6 different options on your screen, and we'll leave this open for just a moment so that everyone has some time to respond. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share the results with the audience. You can see that the first one, the time-consuming or manual effort to collect all the necessary data, that was the most common challenge, followed by COVID-19 rapidly and abruptly changing the mandate. And you can see closely behind that was COVID-19 spread so rapidly, it was difficult to be proactive. And I think that last common challenge actually sets up what Phil has to say pretty nicely.
Thank you, Andrew.
So go ahead, Phil. Sorry about that.
No, thank you very much, Andrew. Topo.ai is a solution partner of the SEC, and we're delighted to share some of our learnings from the crisis. On your screen is a Topo 1 map displaying COVID-19 data by US county. We updated this map daily, and this allowed customers to see COVID data like new cases, deaths, day-over-day changes, closures, trend lines, and other data. This data was overlaid against a range of company assets, depending on the business, and included assets like office or retail locations, home offices, travel locations, distribution centers, factories, clinics, and other types of company assets. And we work closely with our customers to identify the right data and analysis to address their key needs and priorities. And the goal of all this was to provide a common operating picture for COVID-19. This informed life safety decisions, but also we noticed informed key operational decisions, such as whether to keep a facility open. If you can advance, that'd be great. So here are some takeaways we identified while working with our customers on COVID-19. First, we learned that whatever crisis emerges, companies must be able to respond quickly and adjust quickly. Flexible technology that supports dynamic risk assessments is key to the speed and effectiveness of this response. Second, we learned that new insights from data analysis change priorities, and that changing priorities require new analysis. Companies need to continually gather real-time intelligence to analyze and make adjustments to the plan, especially in a situation like COVID-19 with the rapid spread. Number three, we learned that governments in the United States and around the world responded very differently to COVID-19. And this created a need for localized strategies rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. And finally, we saw and noticed that corporate security business continuity teams can deliver crucial and strategic insights to support important operational decisions. We noticed our customers elevated their stature in their respective organizations because they had real-time analysis and a briefing medium to inform the C-suite on what was happening, and so they could make real-time decisions. So whatever crisis comes next, we must be able to assess and respond to it quickly. Just 6 months ago, we would never have foreseen a global pandemic that resulted in thousands of deaths and millions of unemployed. And really, we can't really predict the future on what the next crisis might be. One interesting aspect of this crisis was that some of the most helpful data was open source information emanating from a variety of governmental resources. It was publicly available. And I just want to share a few examples. In the upper right, most of you probably noticed the Johns Hopkins map. This had the number of confirmed cases. In the upper right, we have testing data, which is of growing significance as governments weigh options for reopening. In the lower left, we had a patchwork of municipal and state orders and guidelines, all with different timeframes and conditions. And finally, in the lower right, we had school closures coming from a range of sources. So one of the distinct challenges of security teams faced was there wasn't really a single platform or website that had all the data on COVID, let alone one that delivered an analysis of trends and patterns. And companies also needed to overlay this data against their asset risk profile, their workforce, their offices, to make key security and operational decisions. So I mentioned that insights derived from data analysis change priorities, and those very insights usually result in more analysis and more insights. And this was a very dynamic crisis, and so we noticed priority shifting almost day to day with our customers. We began publishing the number of reported cases on the map that you see at the county level, and we color coded that. This view showed a growing number of counties in red, which indicate more than 1,000 reported cases. As you can imagine, these were most often located around major metropolitan areas such as Atlanta, which is the red area at the top of your screen. But notice Albany, Georgia, in red at the bottom of your screen. Albany is a city of roughly 75,000 people, much smaller than Atlanta. Using reported cases by county, one of our customers was trying to determine where they could safely send field technicians into homes for service repairs. Initially, the judgment of the CEO was to send no technicians into any US county where there was a single COVID-19 case, but this soon became impractical as most counties began reporting cases. So this required a deeper analysis. So we began visualizing confirmed cases on a per capita or per population basis to better understand the depth of potential spread. We also provided graphs of the daily changes, as well as trend lines to see whether a given county was flattening the curve of reported cases. And when we looked at reported cases per county, per capita, the map provided new insights. While there were more reported cases of COVID-19 in the counties around Atlanta, the rural counties had a much higher infection rate per capita. Actually, Atlanta had less than 1 case per 1,000 people, whereas in Albany, it was more than 10 cases per 1,000 people. And then we began looking at testing data, and we saw that Georgia had almost no testing. Less than 1% of the population had been tested. And this suggested that, at least in Georgia, COVID cases were vastly underreported. So our customer conducted this sort of assessment across all of their covered geographies and territories. And using this data, daily field service technician calls were adjusted to minimize the risk to their workforce. So different government responses also meant vastly different operating conditions from country to country, but also even within the US. Here we're looking at closures in the United States by location. And this was an important data set for determining company operations and policies at a local level. And there were so many different kinds of closures, and every government order seemed to have a different end date and different stipulations. And for a company with dozens or even hundreds of locations, having this array of local information in a common operating picture was essential for decision-making. And as we sort of zoom into Texas here, We can see that in the table on the right-hand side, the variety at the county level of different closures. And many of our customers use this information to just practically understand where they could conduct business. And then also what was the impact on partners and suppliers. And they're still using this data along with the information we showed earlier to determine when and where they might be able to resume business in a particular region. So we see the focus now of our customers shifting to reopening their operations. They need real-time data and analysis to inform those decisions. They also need a medium such as a common operating picture to socialize it within their organizations. This particular Topo.ai map shows reported cases in counties that are adjacent to specific office locations of one of our customers. And in addition to color coding the existing cases, this map shows a simple graph of reported cases day by day, providing insights as to whether the disease curve is flattening in those geographies. We also deliver trend lines to project where the cases might be in the coming days and weeks ahead in those specific regions. We also gave customers the ability to document and view COVID status at a given location, such as reported symptoms by employees or visitors. And obviously, this allowed teams to understand not only what was happening in their region, but also within their own specific workforce. So this analysis and insight is paramount for companies to assess when to reopen a given location. And if there's obviously a positive COVID test within a company's workforce, we understand you all need to take specific steps and actions to notify other potentially impacted personnel. So in closing, rather than being reactive, we observed Fortune 500 security teams leading the COVID-19 impact discussions within the C-suite. They shined relative to other groups in their organization. And this geospatial data-driven approach and analysis led the way to make informed local decisions. Companies need a technology platform that allows new incremental geospatial data feeds to be easily added and rapidly. Companies also need a system that supports real-time analysis of this data to support that decision-making. They need tools to disseminate information rapidly. This is especially important for organizations that must assess and mitigate all hazards risk. Flexible, powerful, and easy to use systems are essential. The alternative is a time-consuming manual research and data entry process that detracts from other core security functions and frankly only lengthens the time to respond. Thank you very much. Now back to you, Andrew.
Phil, thank you for sharing that information. And one of the things that struck me as you were presenting, just based on a call I attended the other day, an intelligence analyst was asked, hey, how much should we lean on the local government, the state government or the federal government to be able to make our own determination of when to go back to business? And his response, his advice was flat out, you should not do that. You should rely on your own assessment and your own risk tolerance because of that patchwork scenario you just described, Phil. So anyway, it's time for our second polling question here. I'm going to go ahead and launch it now. And in this question, we're trying to see what types of COVID-related resources are most helpful to you and your organization. And we ask that you please select all that apply. You can see the different options up on the screen. We've got playbooks, we've got relevant data in the same location, government or regulatory guidance on reopening or preparing for the new normal, checklists or standard operating procedures that help address this mitigating risk, and then also reliable, accessible methods of testing for employees. I'll give the audience just a moment to reply. I'd like to thank everybody for participating there. We see here that the top two types of resources are government and regulatory guidance on reopening or preparing for the new normal, and that's tied with checklists or standard operating procedures that address mitigating risk of disease transmission. I think we'll talk to our friends at the SEC toward the end of the broadcast. They may even have some of those resources available now. So now we're going to go back to Kathleen to discuss an ongoing survey that SEC is conducting. Kathleen, would you like to share?
Hi, thanks, Andrew. Yes. So first, let's take a moment to think about how your SOC or GSOC can play a role in helping you all, security practitioners, find information needed to conduct risk assessments faster and possibly to go deeper. To look into this, we set up a just quick 5-question survey. It's not a live survey like the poll. There is a link near the bottom of that slide, and we're going to put it out to the public as well, not just here, and try and get a bunch of people to take it. And then anyone that includes their email address in the survey will get a roll-up of the results. And I want to just clarify question number 3. Now, I'm not reading the questions. Hopefully you all see the deck or have a PDF in front of you. But question 3 that talks about ways, innovative mitigation strategies or processes implemented through your SOC or GSOC after you've collected your information from your risk assessment. I'll just give a few examples. So an example could include using automated scripts and rules to perform mitigating actions leading to the delivery of quality information being sent to a stakeholder, a particular stakeholder for action, or the ability to identify the level of risk or determine the likelihood based on incoming information and company-specific information, plans, goals, etc. And now I think Francis is going to talk a little more about that.
Kathleen, thank you very much. And just, Francis, as we talk about the next generation GSOC, maybe it might help to frame that concept for the audience with just a couple points, and then they'll provide context for this discussion.
Happy
Francis,
to.
I believe. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Kathleen, I think that was a good setup. In that survey, if you can be as specific as possible for tools that you're currently using or are looking at with some anticipation of testing, that would be great. If we can see the array of inputs that come into a SOC, a GROC, a GSOC, indicated up on the top right, we probably have a relevant depiction here, but really it's a collective knowledge opportunity. And when we talk about what next generation centers are going to look like, how do they aggregate? They're probably going to have a little bit more distance with the lessons of COVID between workstations, so those don't have to be repurposed, or they will be built with the ability to skip over certain workstations. But AI, as we've been talking about, is automated intelligence. And that's what makes it dynamic, because if you start to take a look at some of the tools that are in the lower left-hand corner that tell us that people that are coming into our organizations are who they say they are and do what they say they do. And we have smart analytical devices on our perimeter to identify vehicles and personnel by facial recognition or other biometrics. We begin to supplement that with intelligence services and the capabilities of communicating to our uniform officers who are out on patrol or are serving as individuals that are actually running GSOC or SOC operations. So as Phil alluded to, the critical opportunity is speed. And I had a former leader that used to say, tongue in cheek, be quick, be right, and be gone. And there's a real opportunity as we're speaking to executives and answering their questions and needs of really having the ability of automating our intelligence, getting to the right recommendations, being responsive and being relevant to the need. So as we look towards the right on what the fulfillment expectations are, it's not only how automated intelligence and human intelligence give us that capability, it's how we aggregate the data. Do we have the right tools to be able to take many feeds and be able to prioritize them? Do we have the analytical capabilities of having machine intelligence with an oversight of personnel? If we don't, it's okay, because all of these services are provided by others on the outside. Topo did a great job, in my opinion, in terms of stepping into the breach on COVID. This wasn't their particular expertise, but they're technicians, and they have the capability of integrating different information and providing intelligence on a very quick fashion. And at the end of the day, our ability for speed is everything, because it determines whether or not we have mitigated or unmitigated illness. It determines whether or not we have mitigated or unmitigated injury. It determines whether we have mitigated or unmitigated loss of assets or damage to assets. So our ability to analyze, communicate, dispatch, escalate, mitigate, investigate, and provide very strong performance and value metrics is everything. So there's a number of solution innovations, but the real opportunity is to make certain that they're proven practices and that the people who provide them are who they say they are and do what they say they do. And that's something that we have a keen interest in identifying for the community at the Security Executive Council. And
Thanks, Francis. Thanks, Francis. I'll make a couple of comments. I mean, we have people on this webinar from the Philippines to Africa to Canada and points in between. And as practitioners, we all have, one common goal, and that's to mitigate risk to people, process, and assets. And as we've learned through COVID, risk doesn't sleep. And only one company that we know of in our community had pandemic as one of their top risks this year. So obviously a lot of other activities and deliverables aren't getting done at your companies as you're heavily focused on COVID. So one of the ways to continue to move your mission along is through people, process, and technology, and some of that technology that you'll see here on this slide. And one of the biggest mistakes I remember making continuously during my career was I used to think that I owned the risk, and we don't. Our job is to suggest through people, process, and technology, strategies and tactics to mitigate the risk and let the business decide how much risk they want to take on. So keep thinking about that as you and your company evolves through COVID and come out the other side and start tackling some non-COVID activities and deliverables that you have for 2020. And remember to be flexible and nimble and to lean on the community. No one's been through this situation, regardless of how long you've been. This is the one risk that we agree as a Security Executive Council team and with our membership that in history is the one risk that everyone is talking about, everyone is mitigating simultaneously globally. Never seen anything like this before. So just remember, collective knowledge wins. Continue to talk to each other and lean on your solution providers to provide that technology to continue to mitigate this risk and others. And I'll pass it over to Phil for some comments as well.
And Dean, this is Andrew. I was wondering, just one of the things that struck me with Phil's presentation earlier, I was wondering if you might be able to comment on, so we talked in depth about one of our customers, but just some of the different ways that our customer base, as they responded, what were some of their needs in terms of reporting, in terms of data? Obviously, the screen, there's a lot of different potential inputs. There's a lot of potential location intelligence providers, but they may not apply to different types of businesses.
Yeah,
So would you care to comment?
Sure, thanks, Andrew. And having I live in the province of Ontario, as some of you may know, and we were having been through SARS, which originated in the province of Ontario after someone traveled from a specific region in China. What I learned through that and subsequent pandemics are that, the first, let's say 48 hours, 72 hours is like sipping water from a fire hose. And the one key bit of information, you need key information to make business decisions to protect your people and your assets. So I think what we're learning as a community through COVID, as well as through SARS and all the other diseases in between, is that you need to ensure that you're relying on some information and realize quickly that's never going to be perfect. If you're waiting for the perfect amount of information or perfect solution, you're going to be paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. And as a leader, that isn't a prudent way to act, in my personal opinion. So get some reliable information, do your due diligence, surround yourself with people that can lift and know more in different areas of expertise than you, and make a decision as an advisory group and go with it. And then be prepared to be nimble and flexible as the days and weeks progress.
Thank you, Dean. And I think we might have lost Phil's audio connection. Phil, would you like to comment on this slide?
I do. Large enterprises, Fortune 500, data-driven discussions are normal and they're expected. So to back up, Dean's point, walking into a session with data analysis and then a medium to actually go through it rather than just opinions. And I think we noticed a lot of safety and security personnel have tremendous judgment related to managing risk. But the way that's communicated within the enterprise is, in other departments like marketing, sales, it's data, it's KPIs, it's metrics. And I think here, the information was in various silos. Some of it was good, some of it wasn't so good. So, if you can, corroborate one set of data with another set of data, and then approach it with sort of an analytical orientation and a data orientation, overlaid against professional judgment, we noticed that's a winning strategy within the enterprise. So speed, data analysis, and then coming forward with professional judgment backed and rooted in data is really, we think, essential.
Yeah, and one last very brief comment I'll make, Andrew, before we go to the audience is, one of my best mentors repeated to me during any sort of an incident management scenario when times are tough: go back to your company's mission statement. Physically pull it out, look at it during your incident management team meetings. And if you're making decisions that align with and are true to your company's mission statement, then you're probably winning. So that's something else that you can use as a framework, because we know there's different data points. But if you as an incident management and as leadership team can feel good in your hearts and minds that you're making decisions based and aligned with your mission statement, then that's probably the right path to take.
Yeah, and I'd say that lastly, as we do our after actions and our reassessments, we're going to find out that management has deeply respected what we were able to do heroically in most circumstances, and in terms of providing information innovatively, et cetera. But when we find the gaps, we have to make sure that we're first in line and that we have a shopping cart and say, hey, look, with a little introspection, we could do this better. And these are the services and the capabilities that we need. Because when seismic or other issues happen, those scenarios and those next crises that Phil talked about earlier have not only been well predicted, they've been modeled. I live in Seattle, and if the Seattle fault line goes at a 7+ earthquake, we're going to have 10,000 structures down. We're going to have hundreds killed, tens of thousands injured. And what we have to be able to anticipate with that sort of intelligence is what's the follow-up in the data sets? How many people have actually been injured? Are the hospitals at capacity? Very much like we're learning from COVID. Can I stand up my response team? Do I have another team that is sitting and ready to pick up the activities that may be flown in from another geographic area for resilience, for recovery and business continuity? These are the lessons of COVID, and we're looking forward, not just based on our experience, but your experience and what your proven practices are as we enrich in this conversation.
Thank you very much, Francis and Dean and Phil. And so, and with Francis's example there in Seattle, it strikes me that one aspect of it, if you're perhaps selecting the location of a new office or, from selecting from competing areas, is to understand perhaps geographic specific risk there. But there's a lot of offices, whether they're built on fault lines or near fault lines or on the coast, where there's already offices there and they're major centers of commerce. And so then that understanding how bad could it be, and then being able to measure against that to see how bad it actually was. It seems like that's a strategy that different companies could take with them.
Exactly.
So thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Francis.
I said exactly so. And if you look at climate change, take a look at sea level water rise and what it means for port facilities, supply chain, corporate headquarters, et cetera. Those are going to be significant lessons learned.
Thank you, Francis. So it's now time for our last polling question. We are not going to share the results of this with the audience. I'm going to go ahead and launch it now. This question is, would you like to learn more about the Security Executive Council or Topo.ai? Please select only one. Select the first option if you'd like more about guidance and strategy from the SEC. The second option if you'd like to learn more about command center software from Topo.ai. The third option if you'd like to hear from both companies. And the fourth option if you would not like to hear anything at this time. I'll leave this open for just a moment and then we'll move on to the question and answer session. Thanks, everyone. We'll stop it there. And now we'll move on to the question and answer session. We've received some questions in advance of the broadcast, and we have received a couple during the broadcast. We invite you to keep sending them in, and we will answer as many as we can. So here's a question that came in before the broadcast. I think this is probably best for SEC. Do you have any guidance or resources for assessing how or when to transition staff from remote working situations to working in the office? I want probably for Dean or Francis or Kathleen.
Yeah, I was actually going to jump in as Kathleen. We actually have worked on a very thorough paper on resumption of business that is just about ready to go out. It's like 16 pages, so it really tries to cover all the things we could think about of what you might need to do or think about. So it is going out in our May newsletter, which is coming out, will go out Thursday night, be in people's inbox by Friday morning. So if you haven't, you can sign up for a newsletter, but you can also go to that COVID-19 resource page we have, and we'll have it there as well.
Yeah, and I would say that that particular product is informed by our colleagues from some of the two biggest to fail financial institutions, from Fortune 100 manufacturing organizations, from healthcare organizations that we've heard from. So it's a true collective knowledge of reflection.
Thank you. And so another question that came in, this one might be kind of tough to answer concisely, but we'll go ahead and try. So if you're, a lot of companies are facing challenges for budget right now. So do you have any general guidance on how you would advise security professionals to advocate for budget, perhaps for some of those next generation GSOC enhancements, for technology, et cetera?
I do. I think it's a time to lean in. There is certainly going to be great discovery that security and their cross-functional risk mitigation teams have contributed much in this particular crisis. And the self-discerning risk assessment capabilities of understanding that they can do much better next time around. This is not a time to be sharing the pain necessarily and taking cuts that are willy-nilly across the board, because management is going to have an expectation that this is done better next time around. So if teams can lean in and really use those cross-functional relationships with HR, IT, risk management, business continuity to prioritize their shopping list, it's a very good time to be absolutely clear of what the requirements are going to be for services and technology to be better next time out.
And I would add to that too, Andrew, that as a security team, as you have your current and new services listed, think about the qualitative and quantitative impact of continuing to do or not doing those, whether it's a new or current service, because if you're not going to be asked to keep your budgets frozen or claw back X amount of %, when that conversation comes from your leadership team, you can point to that list and have that listed and just have a real robust discussion about, okay, here's the qualitative and quantitative impact of doing something new or not doing something we currently did. And make it a business decision again about how much risk the business wants to accept as you have that discussion about continuing to do, not doing, or doing something new.
Thanks, Dean.
Put a fine point on Dean's remark, Andrew, I'm sorry, that goes to how many activities that the teams are providing that are compliance requirements or brand requirements or culture requirements. And as you're doing those, executive management and leadership has an opportunity to be fully informed of what the risk is of cutting existing services.
Thank you, Francis. And it seems like that also ties into Phil's point earlier, which is just the need for data and metrics and informing those decisions with data. Phil, do you have any comments to add there?
I do. I guess, in terms of, budgets, near term, there's, I think, an obligation for every company to responsibly, get up and running. If not, there's potentially legal ramifications, and it's just maybe like a moral obligation to do things right on the restart. But I keep thinking of this world where in physical security, the budget will match the cybersecurity leaders because physical risks just keep, we've been dealing with data breaches and network breaches for years, and but now it seems like in the recent era, we've had more and more physical events. Really, I believe that the investment is needed more than ever in technology, people, and processes, and thought leadership from groups like the SEC to define success, to develop programs, because for example, COVID-19 could rear its head again in the fall or the winter, or as Francis mentioned, there could be any myriad of other events. just like in the cyber world, there's all these things that could happen. So I would like to think that the leaders of our organizations now more than ever understand the priority and the need to invest in our departments.
Thank you, Phil. And I think this question that we just received ties in well with what you guys just said. And that question is, what safety measures and other metrics are under consideration in order to make a recommendation to the business in the various return to office strategies? And the asker of this question noted that some of that might be addressed in the paper that Kathleen referenced. But do you guys have any safety measures or metrics that you've heard that are under consideration and different return to office strategies or scenarios?
Yeah, there's a number of proven practices in the resource data set, but I think the larger strategic question is what the role is. You know, here we find security as playing a major role in what would usually be an environmental health, a business continuity, a crisis management team specialty. It goes to Phil's observation about what the legal requirements might be, which are bundled under a theory of duty of care. Most brands that find that stickiness with the customer and loyalty and the ability to track customers and even talent through the organization have been working on developing a culture of care in order to woo those customers from their competitors, in order to woo talent from their competitors. And so the proposition becomes, how do we take the aggregated risk oversight and really make a proposition that we're moving from a compliance-oriented duty of care to a privilege of care, and that we have great interest in the customer or our partner or our associates' health, safety, and security. And how do we measure that? Both on the speed and ability to mitigate these risks and for outcome management. We think that at the end of this particular crisis, the tail of the tape is really going to tell us who did it well and who did it not so well. And those proven practices have to be adopted and tested in different organizations. The work isn't done yet. We're learning a great deal from this particular situation, and we'll continue to learn a great deal. And those dashboards are going to be very relevant as we share those and put that product out for everyone's consumption.
And Andrew, I would add one of the key metrics would be confidence. You know, if your staff or the loved ones of your staff don't feel that your workplace is safe and you've taken the right measures, that the lunchroom food isn't safe to eat, then they're not coming back to work. So one of the considerations may be to survey your population, you know, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and ask them about their confidence to resume some or all of their, pre-COVID business activities, whether it's within the office or outside of the office, engaging with their own customers and find out what their thoughts are. And obviously within that survey, you're telling, you know, your staff and your teams what you're doing today, tomorrow, into the future to mitigate all of the associated risks.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks, Francis. Phil or Kathleen, do you have anything to add there?
Again, I'm going to point to our COVID-19 resource page. We do have, they ask for specific metrics, and again, to Francis's point, it depends on your company, your culture, your risk appetite, et cetera, your industry. But there are some general examples, but they're distributed across our papers we've been doing during this time of COVID-19. You may know, many of you may know George Campbell, former CSO of Fidelity. He's one of our metrics gurus, and I need a note. I'm going to reach out to him to see if he can do one of these short papers on that particular topic, and then we'll post it with examples people can see and think about or learn from, and we can post it on our resource page.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And just one, I guess we have time for maybe one more question. Do you have any recommendations? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have any best practices for keeping up with the government regulations regarding travel, workplace safety, city movements, et cetera?
I mean, from my perspective, I would say it's a multi-pronged approach. You know, start locally, and then, you know, regionally and statewide into where the majority of your operations are, and there's never one answer. I would use public and private sources of information. Some of the resources that, you know, whether it's a Topo.ai link and or any of our resources on our COVID-19 page. But I also think talking to colleagues is an important source of information, learning proven practices from them, and you know, as we said earlier, collective knowledge will win.
It's an arduous process for those on the phone that have the gift of having a government relations group or a communications group. Make sure that you're on their list for evolving compliance requirements around health and safety, security, et cetera. We have a tool that is one of our products that we provide clients on request and after negotiation that takes those requirements of the standard compliance expectations and put those items into auditable questions and performance questions. So that is takes a great deal of team play from the end user, from subject matter specialists in compliance and others at the operational level. But those are a couple of ways of keeping track. We certainly are expecting a plethora of compliance guidelines that are going to be coming out of pandemic.
Thank you, Francis. And just one that I would add, in the COVID-19 dashboard that we linked in the slides earlier, there's actually a state closures level data layer. So you can, it's for the United States, but you can look at any location in the United States and see what state or municipal restrictions there are. And that takes us to the end of the broadcast. We hope it provided some very helpful insights, and we thank everyone for attending. A special thank you to our panelists, Francis, Dean, Kathleen, and Phil. Thanks also to my colleague, Jackie Wilson, for all her work behind the scenes. And here are some of the resources we discussed today. We invite them to use them to aid your own mitigation and assessment strategies. And we'll continue to add new thought leadership resources, both the SEC and Topo.ai. And we will continue to share those. We'll send you a link to the recording and to the slides after the broadcast. And we hope everyone stays safe. Thank you.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.